Racist cop confronts. Black woman FBI chief 5 minutes later. He's shocked when his career ends. They say a single moment can alter the trajectory of your entire life. And for one small-town police officer named Jack Halley, that moment struck like thunder on an otherwise ordinary afternoon. It began with a routine traffic stop, the kind you'd see every day on the streets of New Haven. Only this time, the driver was no ordinary citizen. She was the newly appointed chief of the FBI's Violent Crimes Division, an unflinching black woman by the name of Special Agent Cassandra Rhodes. What followed would unravel secrets, ignite deep-seated prejudices, and, in the span of 5 harrowing minutes, end one man's career forever. Jack Halley woke up that morning with a dull ache in his right shoulder. His coffee was burnt, the TV remote wouldn't work, and he'd accidentally left his police cruiser lights on all night, draining the battery. It felt like the entire day was conspiring to be a bad one. He shrugged it off and muttered to himself that once he got out on patrol, everything would settle into a steady, predictable routine. After all, he liked routine. It kept his mind quiet and his prejudices unchallenged. New Haven was an interesting town, a patchwork of suburban houses, old brick buildings near downtown, and a rising wave of tech startups spinning off from research at Yale University. Jack grew up here, or at least in the outskirts of the city, in a neighborhood that prided itself on tradition and loyalty. Ever since he was a boy, he admired the uniform, the sense of power that came with it. But something twisted grew alongside that admiration, a lurking prejudice passed down through subtle dinner-table conversations, local rumors, and misguided beliefs. He'd never seen himself as a racist. He merely told people he was protecting the peace. Yet, more often than not, his definition of peace was painfully narrow. That morning, he finally got his cruiser started with a jump from a fellow officer. He left the station, turned onto Chapel Street, and pulled into his usual route. The morning was bright, the sky a flawless, endless blue. He noted the homeless man on the corner, the young mother crossing the road. He scanned for any suspicious activity, though in truth he often had a preconceived notion of who or what looked suspicious. 40 minutes later, a sleek black SUV caught his eye. It wasn't speeding, nor did it seem to violate any major traffic rules. But something about it made him suspicious it was out of place on this mostly modest street. He ran the plate, federal tags. That should have signaled him to stand down. Instead, curiosity or something darker fueled him to flip on his siren. The SUV pulled over without hesitation. Jack stepped out, every muscle tense. He could see a single figure through the driver's side window, a well-dressed black woman. Already a low boil of resentment seethed in him. She was too calm, too collected, and the car was too expensive for a street like this, at least according to Jack. He approached, tapping the side of the tinted window. She rolled it down. "License and registration," he barked, not bothering to be polite. The woman in the driver's seat handed over some documents. "You'll find everything is in order, officer," she said evenly. She had a voice like carved marble, solid, exact, with an edge of authority that made Jack bristle. He looked at the license. Cassandra Rhodes, age 42, from Washington, D.C. There was a federal identification card clipped to it, bold letters spelling out FBI. Not just an agent, an FBI chief. Jack's face twitched. He'd only ever had one run-in with an FBI agent in his entire career, and that was a fleeting introduction during a local kidnapping case. "Why the tinted windows?" he demanded, ignoring her ID. She arched an eyebrow. "Federal vehicles often come equipped with tinted windows for security reasons. May I ask what the problem is, officer?" Jack was fishing for something, anything, and he sensed he might come up empty. That thought made him angrier. He leaned in, crossing personal boundaries. "You got any contraband in here?" "You have no cause to suspect that," Cassandra said coolly. "If you run the plates, you'll see this is an official vehicle." But he had run the plates. This woman wasn't lying. She was exactly who she claimed to be. Still, Jack wasn't used to backing off so easily. Something in him prickled at her confidence, at the way she didn't scramble or apologize or try to please him like others might. He felt challenged in a way that made his prejudice roar to life. "We'll see about that," he snapped, stepping back to his cruiser. Little did he realize, in the next few minutes, the entire trajectory of his career and life would collide with unstoppable force against the authority of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Inside her SUV, Cassandra Rhodes took a steadying breath. She'd dealt with local law enforcement many times in her career. Sometimes they were cooperative allies. Other times, certain officers harbored mistrust or resentment toward any federal agency. But rarely did she encounter an officer so brazenly dismissive of her credentials right off the bat. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. An agent from her office at the J. Edgar Hoover Building in Washington, D.C., needed her to confirm details about a pending investigation into a string of interstate bank robberies. She typed a quick text, held up momentarily. "Will respond soon." She'd seen enough to know this officer was trouble, but she had no intention of letting him derail her day or overstep the boundaries of his authority. If anything, her presence here was official. She was on her way to meet the local FBI field office in New Haven regarding a multi-state narcotics ring. Time was of the essence. Meanwhile, Jack was back in his cruiser, cursing under his breath. He radioed in, checking the plates again, demanding details from dispatch. He pulled up her record, Cassandra Ebony Rhodes, with clearance levels that outstripped anything Jack could fathom. She had been a key figure in the Violent Crimes Division for over a decade, known for her hard stance on organized crime, and recently promoted to chief within a specialized FBI task force. The radio crackled, "No further action needed. That SUV is FBI property. Return documentation and let her proceed." But Jack's pride was inflamed. He couldn't let it go. He marched back to the SUV, face twisted in a scowl, determined to exert whatever petty authority he believed he had. Cassandra watched him through the side mirror. She'd known men like him before, officers who let their positions inflate their sense of self-importance. She read the tension in his shoulders, saw the anger in his posture. He was ready to escalate. She wondered if she should defuse or let him sabotage himself. Yet she had no desire for an altercation. Her day was already packed. "Step out of the vehicle," Jack demanded, reaching the window. It wasn't a request. She narrowed her eyes. "On what grounds?" "Suspicion of, tinted windows violation," he managed. Cassandra sighed. In Connecticut, certain tints were permissible. Federal vehicles often exceeded local limitations, but generally with special permission or classified mandates. Technically, local law enforcement had the right to verify. However, the way Jack demanded it dripped with intimidation, not legitimate procedure. "Officer," she said patiently, "I'm an FBI special agent in charge. I have clearance and authority to carry a weapon, to use tinted windows, and to coordinate directly with local offices. I'm here on official business. I can provide you with direct contact to my superiors if you need additional confirmation." Jack stared at her, as if her words were wind. The more she spoke, the more he felt overshadowed by a black woman outranking him on every level. He hated it. He clenched his jaw. "Don't lecture me, Miss FBI. Out of the vehicle. Now." Her phone buzzed again. She glanced at it, then back at Jack. This was quickly devolving. With measured movement, she opened the door, stepping out into the sunlight. She was poised, wearing a tailored navy blue pantsuit. She stood a few inches taller than Jack in her low heels, and that only stirred his insecurities further. He grabbed her arm, twisting it behind her back to cuff her. Cassandra's training kicked in. She pivoted, easily slipping out of his grip. She didn't strike him, she simply disentangled herself to avoid being restrained. She'd done this sequence 1,000 times in the FBI training facility at Quantico. Jack reeled back, stunned that she'd moved faster than him. His face turned red. "Resisting arrest," he thundered. She raised her hands slowly, palms out, to show she was unarmed and not a threat. "I'm not resisting. I'm making it clear you have no grounds to cuff me. We can resolve this if you remain calm." His breath came in ragged gasps. For a second, it looked like he might draw his weapon, an action that would carry grave consequences. She kept her hands raised, eyes level with his. Tension crackled in the air. Then, as if by divine intervention, another cruiser pulled up behind them. A local detective, Detective Victor Alvarez, stepped out and quickly assessed the situation. He recognized Cassandra Rhodes, or at least recognized the official insignia on her SUV. He'd been informed by the local FBI liaison that a high-ranking special agent would be arriving in town today. Alvarez's face went pale. He approached swiftly. "Officer Halley, stand down." Jack shot him a withering look. "This is my stop. I'll handle it," I said. "Stand down." "You're making a mistake," Alvarez insisted, placing a firm hand on Jack's shoulder. Then he turned to Cassandra with a respectful nod. "Agent Rhodes, correct?" She inclined her head. "Chief Rhodes, actually, newly promoted. I'm not here to cause trouble, Detective." Alvarez turned to Jack. "Let her go. We've already been told by the feds to cooperate with her." "She's here on official business." Jack's jaw worked, but his pride wouldn't let him yield gracefully. Finally, with a sneer, he shoved Cassandra's ID back at her. "Take it and go," he spat. Alvarez sighed, relieved the situation didn't escalate further. But none of them knew that this was just the beginning. Cassandra had encountered racially charged hostility from fellow law enforcement before, but Jack's brazen disrespect lodged like a thorn in her side. It wasn't simply personal, it was about the systemic attitudes that jeopardized real police work. And as for Jack, the resentment pulsed in his veins, fueling a dark vow that he wouldn't let her or anyone like her walk away unchallenged again. Later that afternoon, Cassandra sat in a conference room at the local FBI field office in downtown New Haven. She'd brushed off the confrontation as best she could. Still, she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that Jack Halley's hostility was not a singular incident. She had grown adept at reading signs, signals of bigger issues that lurked beneath the surface of a department or town. She spread out a case file on the table. Multiple color-coded charts mapped out connections between street-level dealers and a significant narcotics supplier believed to be operating on the Connecticut shoreline. The local FBI agent, James Martinez, and Detective Alvarez flanked her, discussing how best to coordinate with the local police. They were planning a series of raids in conjunction with the DEA, an operation that had been months in the making. Alvarez ran a hand through his short-cropped hair, looking anxious. "I just hope we can rely on full cooperation from certain members of our department," he said, not naming Jack directly, but the implication was clear. Cassandra tapped a pen against the table. "Is Halley going to be a problem?" Alvarez hesitated. "He's set in his ways, has a reputation for being aggressive in certain neighborhoods, but I don't want to cast the entire department in a bad light. Many of us are fully on board with the federal cooperation." Agent Martinez nodded in agreement. "I've worked with him briefly. He's not well liked by many, but he's been in the force for nearly 2 decades, which gives him some internal sway. His father was once a lieutenant. That might complicate our joint operations." Cassandra pursed her lips. She'd seen what happened when officers with questionable motives were left unchecked. It wasn't just a local problem, it undermined trust across the board, making collaborative law enforcement infinitely harder. She decided to keep an eye on Jack Haley. They delved deeper into the specifics of the narcotics case, times, locations, known accomplices, and rumored hideouts. Each detail was crucial. Cassandra's phone vibrated again, an update from Washington about an ongoing investigation into corrupt border officials in Texas. As she scanned the message, the pieces of a bigger puzzle clicked in her mind. Systemic corruption existed everywhere, from the local precinct to the nation's borders, and it took strong leadership to dismantle it. She was determined to stand firm. Jack sat behind his desk at the local police station, radiating animosity. A half-eaten sandwich lay forgotten next to him. His mind replayed the scene from earlier that day, Cassandra's calm demeanor, the way she slipped from his grip, Alvarez stepping in. It burned him up inside. A part of him wanted to believe he was just doing his job. But deep down, if he were honest, he'd know the truth, her mere presence, her authority. Her confidence, especially as a black woman, triggered an ugly resentment he could barely acknowledge. He was used to being the one in control during a traffic stop, used to people fearing him or at least treating him with subservience. Cassandra Rhodes didn't fear him at all, and that chipped away at everything he thought he knew about power. He fiddled with a ballpoint pen, noticing how it squeaked under pressure. Across from him, a fellow officer, Dave Carlson, glanced up. Carlson was a younger recruit, fresh out of the academy, who had yet to adopt Jack's cynical worldview. He asked casually, "Heard you had a run-in with the feds today. Everything okay?" Jack glared. "Feds think they own the place. I was making a routine stop." She resisted. She pulled rank. Carlson shuffled uncomfortably. "I heard she's actually an FBI chief. From D.C. She's heading some big operation." Jack slammed his pen down. "Big operation? She just likes to flash her badge." Federal power trip. The tension in Jack's voice stifled any further curiosity Carlson might have had. He cleared his throat and returned to his paperwork. Jack stared at his reflection in the dark screen of his idle computer. He remembered stories his father had told him, tales of a changing America, a place where old guard mentalities were being questioned. His father had always grumbled that outsiders were messing with how things used to be. Jack absorbed it all without question, weaving a private narrative that he was under siege, that the world was shifting in ways that marginalized him somehow. He felt the phone vibrating in his pocket. Pulling it out, he recognized the caller, Lieutenant Mary Hightower, a superior who rarely reached out directly. He hesitated but answered. "Haley," he said. "Officer Haley, I heard there was an incident with a federal agent earlier. Care to explain?" He winced. "Just a routine stop, Lieutenant. I suspected illegal tinted windows. She got lippy. That's all." Hightower's voice was measured. "I have a report here from Detective Alvarez. He claims you tried to cuff the FBI chief without probable cause. Is that accurate?" He felt the walls closing in. She resisted. "That's all there is to it." A pause. Then Hightower said, "I'm advising you to tread carefully. We've been instructed to fully cooperate with the FBI. We can't afford complaints of misconduct. Do I make myself clear?" Jack ground his teeth. "Understood." He hung up, feeling cornered. He wasn't used to this level of oversight, and he hated it. He hated the idea of Cassandra Rhodes even more. In his mind, she was the symbol of everything that threatened his sense of order, her rank, her competence, her confidence, and her race. 2 days later, the Joint Task Force launched its first series of coordinated raids on suspected narcotic stash houses around New Haven's industrial district. Cassandra oversaw the operation from a mobile command center, while local detectives, D agents and FBI field agents executed the mission. It was tense, methodical, and time-sensitive. Jack found himself assigned to perimeter duty, a detail that rankled him. Usually he was on the front lines. But with the feds in charge, he was relegated to controlling traffic and blocking off side streets. He stewed in his cruiser, listening to the chatter over the radio. Team Alpha, door breached, suspects detained. Team Bravo, area secure, negative on contraband. Team Charlie, we have a runner request backup. Every successful step they took, every efficient command from Cassandra's voice over the radio felt like a personal affront to him. It culminated when he overheard Alvarez praising her direct leadership, outstanding coordination. Chief Rhodes couldn't have gone smoother. Jack scowled, frustration knotting in his chest. Then a sudden dispatch call came through. A smaller operation across town discovered a suspected hideout for one of the ring's main distributors. Additional support was needed. Jack jumped at the chance. He sped down the side streets, sirens wailing, ignoring the direct order to remain on perimeter duty. By the time he arrived, local police had already entered the building. Shots had been fired, but no fatalities reported so far. Jack charged in, adrenaline surging, determined to prove himself or, at the very least, overshadow Cassandra's accomplishments. Inside the dimly lit warehouse, Jack found two suspects pinned behind a row of crates. Officers crouched behind columns. Gunfire echoed against the concrete walls. Jack took cover, exchanging terse glances with the officers. He demanded, "Situation." One officer shouted over the gunfire, "They're armed. We think it's about to escalate. There's a hostage inside." Without waiting for backup, Jack pressed forward. He claimed he was an excellent shot, and he had been in a few shootouts before. But this time, his recklessness overshadowed his skill. He tried to move behind a shipping container, hoping to flank the suspects. In his haste, he slipped on a slick patch of spilled oil. He went down hard, sliding out into the open. Gunshots immediately zeroed in on him. He scrambled, heart pounding. Another shot rang out from behind the crates, and a bullet grazed Jack's shoulder. He yelled in pain, adrenaline spiking to near panic levels. Before the assailant could fire again, a voice boomed, "FBI, drop your weapon." Shots rang out, and the suspect's gun skittered across the floor. Backup had arrived. A team of federal agents, led by Cassandra Rhodes, swarmed the area, quickly disarming the suspects and freeing the panicked hostage. Jack lay on the ground, cursing under his breath. Cassandra strode over, weapon still drawn, eyes scanning for any secondary threat. Once she confirmed the area was secure, she kneeled beside Jack. "Officer Halley, you're injured," she said, voice taut with concern despite everything. His pride flared. "I'm fine," he spat. Her gaze flicked to the blossoming crimson on his shoulder. She signaled for the paramedics. "This is going to need medical attention. Don't move." He wanted to push her away, to stand and prove he wasn't beaten, but sharp pain lanced through his arm. Two paramedics arrived, carefully lifting him onto a gurney. Cassandra stepped back, letting them do their job. Jack stared at her, confusion mingling with hatred. She just saved him from a far worse outcome, possibly even saved his life. Part of him felt indebted. The rest of him loathed that feeling, loathed her for doing what he believed. He, as a man, a white officer, should have done himself. The paramedics wheeled him out. Cassandra stood in the flickering fluorescent light, expression unreadable. She radioed in the successful apprehension of the suspects. Another victory for the Joint Task Force. 2 days in the hospital gave Jack ample time to stew. The bullet had only grazed him, but the wound was deep enough to require stitches and forced rest. He lay in bed, the smell of disinfectant swirling in his nostrils. A steady drip from the fourth and the beep of the heart monitor counted the passing hours. He replayed the warehouse incident in his mind, the humiliation of slipping, the sting of the bullet, and the fact that Cassandra Rhodes had effectively saved him. The doctors told him if she and her team hadn't intervened at that exact moment, the suspect might have landed a direct shot. Instead of gratitude, bitterness consumed him. He watched local news coverage from his bed. They praised the FBI's successful takedowns, highlighting Cassandra's leadership and the cooperation with local forces. Jack clenched his jaw so hard it ached. There was brief mention of an injured officer, no name given, just a footnote. That stung even more. He was overshadowed and irrelevant. His father, a frail man with a gravelly voice, visited that afternoon. They had a muted conversation about the good old days, about how policing had changed. His father's eyes lit up with anger at the mention of the FBI. He even said, "They overstep, should let local cops do their jobs." Jack nodded in agreement, but deep down, he knew the feds had done his job better than he did. A nurse came in to check his vitals. She was a warm woman in her 50s, kindly eyes behind reading glasses. She offered a gentle smile. "Your chart says you'll be released tomorrow. That's good news, officer," he grunted, not bothering to be polite. The nurse adjusted the fourth. "You're lucky it wasn't worse, you know," she said softly. "Someone must have been looking out for you," Jack glared. He didn't want to hear it. He especially didn't want to give Cassandra Rhodes any credit for saving his hide. He wondered how he'd face the precinct after this, how he'd handle all the sideways glances and the knowledge that his personal vendetta had nearly gotten him killed. Already, rumors were spreading that he'd violated direct orders to remain on the perimeter. The final after-action reports weren't written yet, but he knew he could be reprimanded. He felt cornered, his pride battered. In that emotional whirlwind, a dangerous resolve hardened. He decided that he needed to push back against Cassandra Rhodes, to find some way to prove she wasn't as perfect or as justified as everyone believed. If it cost him everything, so be it. At least he'd keep his sense of self-worth, twisted as it was. Cassandra had barely returned to her office in D.C. when she received the call from a colleague at the Department of Justice. Rumors were swirling that an anonymous tip had been filed, accusing her of overstepping her authority and engaging in racial discrimination against a local officer. Cassandra nearly laughed at the irony, but it wasn't funny. Anonymous tips could trigger an internal affairs review, which could hamper her ability to continue her critical investigations. She suspected Jack Halley was behind it, or someone close to him. The accusations sounded preposterous, claiming that she targeted him during the raid, putting him in harm's way, and that she had verbally harassed him, among other falsehoods. Cassandra's record was spotless, but in the world of bureaucracy, a single complaint was enough to slow things down and generate a cloud of suspicion. Her boss, Deputy Director Marshall Gaines, called her into his office. He was a tall man in his 60s, with a stern yet fatherly demeanor. "Cassandra, I hate to drop this on you, but an IA investigation might be opened. The complaint has some very serious charges." Cassandra sucked in a breath. "I have body cam footage, eyewitness testimonies, and the official after-action report that all confirm I never targeted or harassed that officer. In fact, we saved his life." Gaines nodded. "I believe you, but you know how these processes work. We'll have to comply with the review. In the meantime, I want you to continue your responsibilities as normal. Don't let this derail your operations." Cassandra thanked him and left, frustration simmering in her gut. She felt a personal sting. This was an underhanded move from an officer too blind to see he was the one in the wrong. But more than that, she worried about the overshadowing effect on her cases. The narcotics ring was far from dismantled, and her resources might be diverted to defend against these allegations instead of pursuing criminals. On her way out, she ran into an old friend, Special Agent Rebecca Tran, who had heard about the complaint. She laid a reassuring hand on Cassandra's shoulder. "Don't sweat it. The truth will come out. Just be prepared to show every scrap of evidence in your favor." Cassandra managed a small smile. "I will. I just wish I didn't have to deal with this petty nonsense when we have bigger battles to fight." Inside, she knew that the real danger was the seeds of mistrust these allegations might plant. And ironically, that was exactly the intention behind them, to sow doubt about her integrity and hamper her momentum. What she didn't expect was how swiftly justice would turn the tables on Jack Haley himself. Released from the hospital, Jack returned to duty with a heavily bandaged shoulder and a chip on the other one. He spent his days prowling the station halls, quietly stoking rumors. He whispered about how the FBI was meddling, about how Cassandra Rhodes had her own agenda. He planted seeds of distrust among some of the more impressionable officers. Carlson, the young officer, grew uneasy around him. Alvarez, who suspected Jack might be behind the anonymous complaint, kept a close eye. Meanwhile, Cassandra's team was meticulous in gathering evidence to refute the baseless claims. They compiled footage from the warehouse operation, statements from paramedics, from Detective Alvarez, from fellow FBI agents. The narrative was crystal clear. Cassandra exercised restraint and professionalism. Jack was the one who disobeyed orders. As the complaint began to unravel, Jack's hostility escalated. He started digging into Cassandra's background, trying to find any skeleton in her closet. He even reached out to questionable contacts, hoping someone had dirt on her. To his dismay, she was clean. But in the process, Jack kicked over a stone that hid his own secrets. He had a checkered internal file, complaints of excessive force in predominantly black neighborhoods, a few subtle warnings from superiors, a short suspension that had been quietly overturned due to lack of conclusive evidence. Most telling of all was a suppressed investigation into possible tampering with evidence, something that had been swept under the rug by friends in the department back when Jack's father was still a lieutenant. A local journalist, Ebony Mathis, caught wind of the fiasco surrounding Jack's confrontation with Cassandra. She began doing what journalists do best, asking questions. She filed FOIA requests, interviewed community members, and compared notes with local attorneys who specialized in civil rights cases. Slowly, a pattern emerged. Jack Haley's name turned up in multiple complaints, many of them from people of color, alleging abuse of power and racially charged harassment. At first, Ebony couldn't get any of the alleged victims to go on record, but after the story of the FBI confrontation circulated, the tide began to turn. People were more willing to speak, seeing that perhaps finally accountability might be possible. Ebony compiled their testimonies, transcripts, and police reports. It was damning evidence that might topple the shield protecting Jack Haley for years. By the time the Internal Affairs Review cleared Cassandra Rhodes of the false complaint, a different storm was already brewing, one that would rock the New Haven Police Department to its core. It began innocently enough. Ebony Mathis, a local investigative journalist for the New Haven Register, had caught wind of Jack Haley's confrontation with the FBI chief. At first, she intended to do a simple piece on the tension between local law enforcement and federal agents. But as she dug deeper, she realized she'd stumbled onto a far more explosive story. Ebony started making phone calls, interviewing community members and former officers who hinted that Jack Haley had a long history of dubious behavior. Although many were initially reluctant to speak on the record, fearing backlash or doubting anyone would listen, Ebony's persistence chipped away at their hesitation. She combed through old police blotters and internal documents, some acquired through Freedom of Information Act FOIA requests. Over time, a mosaic of complaints emerged, each case revealing a pattern of excessive force, racially charged comments, and suspicious lost footage from body cams. The final catalyst came when Ebony tracked down an ex-officer who had resigned under murky circumstances. This individual confessed to her that Jack Haley often manipulated police reports to justify his aggressive tactics. The ex-officer admitted he had once witnessed Jack rough up a teenage suspect, only to watch his partner lose the body cam footage. Similar stories began surfacing, echoing the same horrifying pattern of intimidation and cover-ups. With each testimony, Ebony's sense of outrage grew, driving her to keep investigating until she had enough evidence to break the story wide open. The day Ebony's article went live, it hit New Haven like a thunderclap. The New Haven Register featured a banner headline, "Officer Under Fire, a History of Allegations and Abuse." Beneath it, a bold subheading read, "New Evidence Emerges Against Veteran Cop Jack Halley." The piece detailed how numerous complaints against Jack had been dismissed over the years due to lack of evidence, despite multiple eyewitnesses claiming otherwise. It highlighted the stories of 3 civilians who had come forward, one of them a former youth counselor, another a grocery store cashier, and another a construction worker, each describing chilling encounters with Jack that ranged from verbal harassment to physical intimidation. Jack was at home when the article dropped, flipping irritably through TV channels. His phone began buzzing incessantly, calls, text messages, and voicemails. Some were from local reporters seeking his side of the story, others from curious colleagues. He let them all go unanswered. A hollow pit formed in his stomach. He had been so consumed with trying to destroy Cassandra Rhodes that he never imagined he might be exposed himself. At the station, the atmosphere curdled with tension. Officers crowded around a copy of the paper in the break room, whispering in hushed tones. A few shot anxious looks at Jack's empty desk, while others openly speculated about the validity of Ebony's findings. Dave Carlson, the young officer, reread the article multiple times, unsettled by what he saw, the names of complainants, descriptions of bruises and scars, the eerie consistency of the allegations. He remembered Jack's surly attitude, the racial overtones in his snide remarks, and suddenly the story felt uncomfortably real. Detective Victor Alvarez cornered Jack the moment he returned to the station later that day. "This is bigger than you," Alvarez warned, voice low but forceful. "You've opened a can of worms you can't close. You're not going to talk your way out of this." Jack sneered, trying to mask his fear. "This journalist is on a witch hunt," he spat. "I'm not going down without a fight." He demanded the department release a statement condemning the press, but his superiors refused. They were already scrambling to handle the fallout. The police chief, under pressure from City Hall and community leaders, announced a formal review of Jack's record. The mayor hinted at a possible independent audit of the entire department, fueling speculation that other long-buried scandals might surface. Desperate and furious, Jack contacted Ebony Mathis directly. He phoned her office, threatening legal action if she didn't print a retraction. Ebony, who had expected such a call, calmly responded that she had ample documentation and multiple eyewitness testimonies to back her claims. When Jack resorted to name-calling, she simply hung up. He tried emailing her editors, but they stood by Ebony's work. If anything, his belligerent behavior only confirmed their suspicion that she might be onto something even bigger. Every day, more people came forward. Some described harrowing stories that left the public reeling. A single mother tearfully explained how Jack had pulled her over late one night, demanding she step out of her car at gunpoint without any apparent reason. A local shop owner recounted Jack's frequent visits, during which he hurled thinly veiled threats under the guise of enforcing minor infractions. In each case, the old paper trail existed or had once existed, but the complaints had vanished from the official record, often reappearing only as vague line entries or redacted notes. Cassandra Rhodes, safely back in her office after concluding the final narcotics raids, received updates from Alvarez and her own legal team. With the IA review confirming her innocence, she stayed above the fray, preferring to focus on the success of the multi-state operation she had spearheaded. She had no time for a personal vendetta, and indeed, she felt a quiet relief watching the department finally address Jack's harmful actions. If his downfall brought any sort of justice to those he had wronged, she considered that a positive outcome. Eventually, the hammer fell. One morning, Jack arrived at the station, exhausted from endless calls and sleepless nights, to find a sealed envelope on his desk. Inside was a formal letter of suspension. Effectively, he was stripped of his badge and gun until further notice. He stormed into the chief's office, demanding an explanation. The chief's expression was grim. "Officer Halley, there's too much evidence mounting against you. We have no choice but to suspend you pending the outcome of an internal affairs investigation. If the allegations are proven, you'll be terminated and possibly prosecuted." Jack felt a rush of hot rage course through his body. He banged a fist on the desk, ranting about loyalty and betrayal. But the chief's decision was final, and so was the city's stance. Too many complaints were stacking up, too many voices demanding accountability. The climate that once allowed Jack to operate with impunity had shifted. The old guard protections no longer shielded him. Defeated, Jack retreated to clear out his locker. He passed by officers staring at him with fear, contempt, or a cold kind of pity. Dave Carlson, who had once admired him, looked away, unsure how to reconcile the officer he knew with the stories splashed across the front page. As Jack removed his personal items, a framed certificate, a few old photos, a hollow realization sank in. He was no longer a cop, no longer shielded by the blue wall of silence. Even the union seemed hesitant to defend him, wary of public outrage. That afternoon, as he sat in his car in the station parking lot, a single thought consumed him. How had everything unraveled so fast? In a matter of days, the FBI complaint he had filed against Cassandra was proven false, and the resulting scrutiny had turned back on him tenfold. Outside, dark clouds loomed over the horizon, fitting the foreboding mood. Jack wiped sweat from his brow, rummaging through his glove compartment in a futile search for anything that could save him. But no piece of paper or hidden record could erase the truth. The people he had victimized were finally being heard. The system was demanding answers, and Jack Halley's long reign of unchecked authority had come crashing to an end. And in that fleeting moment, as thunder rumbled in the distance, he wondered if he was truly prepared to face the reckoning that lay ahead. Furious and desperate, Jack decided to confront Cassandra directly. He had nothing left to lose. He found out she was set to make one last trip to the New Haven field office before heading back to DC. He drove there in his personal car, ignoring the stares from staff who recognized him as the disgraced officer. He caught up with her in the parking garage, where she was loading a thick case file box into the trunk of her SUV. She turned to see him approach. "Officer Halley," she greeted, her voice even. "I was told you were suspended." He advanced on her with a wild look in his eyes. "This is all your fault," he hissed. "You think you're so righteous, waltzing in here with your fancy FBI badge, turning my own department against me." She set the box down calmly. "It's not my fault you made a series of poor decisions and got exposed, Halley. The truth was going to come out eventually." He scoffed. "You're the one who escalated everything from the start. If you'd just shown respect," she raised a hand sharply. "Respect? You pulled me over without cause, tried to cuff me. You disobeyed orders in a raid and nearly got yourself killed. And then you filed a false complaint against me, jeopardizing my career and the work of the FBI. Where does respect fit into that?" Jack clenched his fists, mind swirling with denial and anger. He struggled for words, every justification sounding hollow. She took a step forward, her gaze firm but not unkind. "Halley, I don't know your life story, but I know fear and hate when I see it. You thought you could bully me. that you'd never have to answer for your actions. Now the system that protected you for so long can't shield you anymore. He trembled, an impotent rage boiling inside. They've suspended me. They're going to charge me for stuff that was always swept under the rug. My career is done. Cassandra didn't flinch. So was mine if your lie had stuck. But the difference is, I don't build my career by stepping on others or abusing power. You did. He breathed raggedly, tears threatening to blur his vision. He was a man confronted with the consequences of decades of unchecked behavior. Part of him wanted to lash out physically, but he knew that would seal his fate in handcuffs. Another part of him felt an odd relief that the facade was over, that the illusions he clung to were collapsing. "You cost me everything," he repeated, but there was less conviction behind the words. She shook her head softly. "Your choices cost you everything. I just refuse to be another of your victims." He turned away, fists still clenched, unable to face her. His entire world had crumbled because of a single traffic stop that revealed the festering rot in his life. Cassandra calmly placed the case file in her trunk, closed it, and looked at him one last time. Without another word, she got in the driver's seat and drove off, leaving him standing there, a broken man in a lonely garage. Within days of Cassandra Rhodes driving off and leaving Jack Haley in that lonely parking garage, the fallout began. The New Haven Police Department, eager to protect its standing in the community and mitigate any legal liability, took swift action. Official charges were filed against Jack for multiple counts of misconduct, falsifying reports, and excessive use of force. He was stripped of his rank, placed on administrative leave, and soon faced the very real prospect of being prosecuted for civil rights violations. Local media outlets pounced on the story. The New Haven Register, the city's oldest daily newspaper, ran a front-page expose, "Officer Under Fire, Jack Haley's History of Allegations and Abuse." Journalists dug into the internal files that had been quietly gathering dust for years. They brought to light patterns of racial profiling, brutality complaints from residents in predominantly black neighborhoods, and consistent charges of harassment. Many of the old complaints had been mysteriously marked inconclusive, but the register revealed witness statements previously ignored by the system that painted an undeniable portrait of excessive force. All eyes turned to the upcoming legal proceedings at the New Haven Superior Court. On the day of his first arraignment hearing, Jack slumped in the back of a squad car, irony at its cruelest. Cameras flashed the moment he was brought inside, but the once confident swagger was gone, replaced by hunched shoulders and haunted eyes. The man who had so forcefully put others in handcuffs now found himself on the wrong side of the law. Outside, protesters carried signs demanding accountability, chanting slogans of "no justice, no peace." Some recognized Jack from his years on the force and hurled accusations of their own experiences. Others were there simply because they believed in standing against abuse of power. Inside the courtroom, the tension was thick enough to taste. Detective Victor Alvarez arrived to give his deposition. He testified calmly but decisively about Jack's notorious reputation within the department, how multiple officers had witnessed his aggressive behavior, how official warnings were downplayed by those in power who seemed more interested in preserving the department's image than in justice. Alvarez recounted the incident in which Jack tried to cuff Cassandra Rhodes without cause, offering an unvarnished account of the blatant racism that had reared its head that day. Following Alvarez's testimony, 3 citizens took the stand. Individuals Ebony Mathis, the Register journalist, had interviewed for her scathing article. Each one described harrowing encounters with Jack Haley. A small business owner recounted how Jack had routinely harassed him, citing imagined code violations to intimidate and extort compliance. A young mother tearfully testified about the night Jack pulled her over, berating her and threatening to remove her child from the car for no apparent reason. Most damning was the testimony of a young black teenager, now older and more confident than when the incident had occurred. Years ago, Jack had used a baton on him for suspected shoplifting, an accusation later proven false. Body cam footage, conveniently lost after the incident, was finally produced by an internal affairs officer who insisted it had been mislabeled in departmental archives. The footage left the courtroom in stunned silence. Jack's aggression, the slurs muttered under his breath, and the teen's terrified screams were all captured in stark detail. Throughout the proceedings, Jack sat as if carved from stone. Even his court-appointed defense attorney seemed overwhelmed by the avalanche of evidence. The attorney tried to argue that Jack had been under extreme stress, working long hours in high-crime areas, and that departmental policies had been vague. But the judge, a stern woman with decades of experience on the bench, was unconvinced. She reminded everyone in the courtroom that no amount of stress or vague policy could excuse blatant civil rights violations and racially motivated aggression. Back at the station, officers whispered among themselves. Some had once admired Jack's take-charge attitude, but now they felt betrayed. His actions threatened the entire department's credibility. Younger recruits like Dave Carlson were visibly shaken, realizing the man they had once looked up to was everything they were taught not to be. And, as the story spread beyond New Haven, the Connecticut State's Attorney's Office began its own review of Jack's past cases, investigating whether he had wrongfully influenced prosecutions. Meanwhile, Cassandra Rhodes remained in Washington, D.C., wrapping up the final paperwork on the multi-state narcotics operation. She was in constant communication with Detective Alvarez and Agent James Martinez, who kept her informed. She didn't gloat when she heard how swiftly justice had turned against Jack. Instead, she maintained her trademark professional calm. In quiet moments, though, she felt a sense of relief and, admittedly, vindication. She had refused to be cowed by Jack Halley's bullying, and now the system was finally correcting a long-standing injustice. The trial moved forward with remarkable speed, given the public pressure and the clear weight of the evidence. Civil rights attorneys representing several of Jack's victims filed additional lawsuits, demanding both financial compensation and a broader departmental reform. Community leaders called for mandatory bias training, stronger disciplinary measures, and transparent oversight in the New Haven Police Department. The calls for change echoed all the way to City Hall, where the mayor promised an independent audit of police practices and a renewed commitment to restoring public trust. Day by day, Jack's defenses eroded. Toward the end, there was talk of a possible plea deal if he confessed to specific charges. He might receive a reduced sentence. But the deal came with a humiliating condition. He would have to publicly admit that he had used his authority to victimize people of color, confessing on record that his biases had driven his behavior. For a man whose entire identity was once intertwined with the power of the badge, it was a bitter pill indeed. At the final hearing, the courtroom was standing room only. A hush fell as Jack stood to speak. His hands trembled slightly. Gone was the anger and bravado. What replaced it was a broken, hollow man, forced to confront the rubble of his life. He cleared his throat, and in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, I regret the pain I've caused. I abused my authority. I targeted people based on their race. I didn't follow the rules I swore to uphold. I'm Some people in the gallery wept, not for Jack, but for the victims who had endured his reign unchecked for so long. Others felt a surge of hope that, perhaps, this was a signal of changing times. The judge thanked the victims for their courage in coming forward and stressed that the city must learn from this case. Then she handed down her sentence, a fine, probation, community service, and the possibility of jail time if any further offences came to light. Jack's career in law enforcement was unequivocally over. His name was tarnished beyond repair. No one from the New Haven Police Department offered him a handshake or a ride home. He was escorted out a side door by a bailiff, avoiding the cameras that swarmed the front steps. As he left, protesters and reporters alike filled the air with shouts and camera flashes. He covered his face, knowing that this was the final moment of his public life as an officer. Karma had indeed arrived in full force, delivering a reckoning that was years overdue. The racist cop who tried to sabotage a newly appointed black woman FBI chief had instead become the architect of his own downfall. And as the dust settled, Cassandra Rhodes remained steadfast in her commitment to justice, moving on to her next high-stakes assignment with the lessons of New Haven forever etched into her resolve. And there you have it, a dramatic tale of power, abused, integrity tested, and justice delivered. Officer Jack Halley thought he could bully a high-ranking FBI chief simply because he wore a badge and carried a grudge. Instead, his own secrets came to light, leading to the downfall of his career and his public reputation. Meanwhile, Special Agent Cassandra Rhodes emerged stronger than ever, reminding us all that resilience, truth, and unwavering professionalism will always outlast prejudice. If you found this story compelling, or if it stirred any emotions you didn't expect, go ahead and hit that like button. Share this video with your friends who love a good real-life drama, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories of karma, courage, and comeuppance. Your support helps us continue bringing you the bold narratives that hold a mirror up to society and show us our true selves. Thank you for watching.